The morning my daughter-in-law Brenda Voss sent me a notification asking me to join something called Homebase. I assumed it was a recipe app. It wasn't. It was a household management platform, and when I opened it, there were 38 tasks assigned to me across the next 4 weeks, every single one of them labeled Grandma in cheerful blue text. No question marks. No if you're free. No would you mind. Just my time, organized and color-coded by someone who hadn't asked me once. My name is Josephine Aldcroft. Most people call me Jo. I'm 63 years old, and for 31 years I worked as a librarian at the Guelph Public Library. Children's section first, then branch head for the last decade before I retired. I know what it feels like to be useful. I've always known that. For most of my adult life, being needed felt like the finest thing the world could offer. My husband, Bernard Aldcroft, died 2 years ago. Lung cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by November. 8 months between the word and the end. We'd been married for 37 years, and people always said we were the kind of couple that made others believe in marriage. I believed in it too. After he died, I didn't know what to do with my hands. They kept reaching for things that weren't there. His coffee mug in the morning, his reading glasses on the arm of the chair, the radio he always turned on before I woke up. My son, Wesley Aldcroft, lived 40 minutes away in Mississauga with his wife, my daughter-in-law Brenda Voss, and their 2 children. My grandson Tobias, who was 9 and quiet in the way that thoughtful children often are, and my granddaughter Grace, who was 6 and had Bernard's eyes and his habit of laughing at exactly the wrong moment. I loved them both with the full weight of my chest. After Bernard died, spending time with Tobias and Grace was the one thing that made the days feel less hollow. I want to be honest about something. In the beginning, I offered. Nobody asked me to step in the way I eventually did. When Bernard was sick and I was still working, Wesley and Brenda had been managing fine on their own. After I retired and found myself with nothing but empty afternoons, I simply started showing up. Picking up Tobias from school on Tuesdays, taking Grace to swimming lessons on Thursday mornings, cooking Sunday dinner every week without fail. It felt natural. It felt right. It felt like proof that I still mattered in the world. The problem with making yourself indispensables is that people eventually stop wondering whether you're willing. They simply assume you are. I noticed it happening slowly. The first sign I remember clearly was the afternoon my old colleague Linda Marchetti and I had finally planned a proper lunch together. A sit-down place we'd been meaning to try for months. Brenda called while I was still at the table, asking if I could leave early to collect Tobias because she was stuck in a meeting. I went. Of course I went. I spent the rest of the afternoon feeling vaguely ashamed, though I couldn't have said exactly why, because nobody had forced me. I had simply folded. That became the pattern. My plans started to feel conditional. Book club, dentist appointments, a watercolor class I'd signed up for, after finding a flyer tucked into a returned library book. I missed the first 3 sessions because something always came up. Something that involved Wesley and Brenda's calendar, never mine. The hardest part wasn't the inconvenience. It was how completely ordinary it all seemed. There was just a steady, invisible current of expectation, and I kept swimming in it without asking where it was taking me. Then came the Homebase notification. I opened the app and scrolled through those 38 tasks. Monday, pickup. Thursday, swimming. Saturday, overnight so Wesley and Brenda could attend a work event. 3 separate dinner prep requests. A dentist run for Grace. Help sorting Tobias's school project. A shopping errand with Brenda because her car wasn't big enough. Every task had my name attached to it in that cheerful blue, like a department store rota. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and stood there. Then I made myself a cup of tea I didn't drink, and sat at the table where Bernard and I used to do the crossword every Saturday morning. I didn't respond to the notification that day. I told myself I was being too sensitive. 3 days later, I arrived early to collect Tobias from his after-school robotics club at a community center across town. Brenda had texted me the address, and I'd found parking and was heading toward the entrance when I heard her voice from around the corner of the corridor. A door was propped open with a rubber wedge. I wasn't trying to listen. I stopped because I heard my own name. "I know," Brenda was saying, and I could hear the laugh underneath it. The particular kind of laugh people use when they're describing something they find clever. She literally does everything. School runs, cooking, babysitting, you name it. We'd be paying $3,000 a month otherwise. A pause. No, she doesn't charge. She's retired. She loves it. Another pause. I think she loves it. She never says she doesn't. I stood in that corridor without moving. I heard the other voice ask something, her sister. I thought the tone was familiar. And then Brenda answered. Wesley says she doesn't really have anything else going on. She rattles around in that house by herself. Honestly, I think we're doing her a favor. I stood there until I heard her say goodbye and heels on linoleum coming my way. I turned and walked back toward the main entrance, pulled in a breath of cold evening air, and by the time Tobias came running out with his backpack half unzipped, I had managed to put something resembling a smile onto my face. He told me they'd built a robot that could sort Lego by color. I told him that was the most impressive thing I'd heard all week. On the drive home, I kept both hands on the steering wheel and my eyes on the road, and I didn't say a single word about what I'd heard. That night, I sat in the living room for a long time after dark. I didn't turn the lights on. Bernard's armchair was still in the corner. I hadn't been able to move it. I found myself talking to him the way I'd started doing in the months after his funeral, when the house got too quiet. Did I let this happen? I said out loud. The silence didn't answer me, but the question didn't go anywhere. After midnight, I went to the bedroom closet and took down the fishing tackle box that had been sitting on the top shelves since Bernard died. It had been his father's first, then his. It smelled like engine oil and the summer. I'd been meaning to pass it on to Wesley, but every time I thought about it, I couldn't quite bring myself to. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the lid. Hookahs and weights, a reel of old line, a faded photograph of Bernard at 16, holding up a walleye with both arms, and underneath everything, in the inner tray, a card in a small envelope with my name on the front in his handwriting. I hadn't known it was there. The date inside told me he'd written it 3 years before he died. Near the end, after the ordinary and tender things a person says after 35 years of marriage, there was a paragraph I had to read 3 times before it fully landed. We always said we'd get to Victoria together and see the Butchart Gardens. Don't wait until you think the timing is right. Timing is a story we tell ourselves to stay comfortable. If I'm not there to go with you, Joe, go without me. I'll be there in the salt air. I promise. I sat on the edge of our bed and read it again. And then I cried in a way I hadn't in months. Not from grief exactly, but from something that felt closer to recognition. Bernard had known me. He'd known this tendency in me, this habit of waiting, of making myself small, of putting the journey off until everyone else was settled. He'd seen it and written it down and tucked it into a tackle box, where he must have known I'd find it eventually, when I needed it most. I wiped my face, then I opened my laptop. There is a moment when a decision stops feeling impossible and simply feels necessary. I searched flights to Victoria. I found a fare. I found a hotel not far from the inner harbor, modest and clean. Before I'd fully registered what I was doing, I had my credit card in my hand. I booked 5 nights, departure in 10 days. For the first time in longer than I could calculate, something in my chest unclenched. I didn't tell Wesley. I didn't tell Brenda. I knew exactly what would happen if I did. The negotiation, the sighing, the careful guilt delivered in the language of concern. I wasn't ready for that conversation. What I was ready for was my own life, and I was afraid that if I waited for permission, I'd be waiting until there was nothing left to give it to. I packed quietly. I bought a new duffel bag because mine was 20 years old. I arranged mail hold. I texted my neighbor Anita Forsyth, a retired nurse who lived 2 doors down and had a spare key, letting her know I'd be away for nearly 2 weeks. She texted back, "Finally. Have a wonderful time." She was the first person who seemed entirely unsurprised. 2 days before I left, I sat down and went through my banking. Something about Brenda's words in that corridor had been working through me, and I wanted the full picture. I found 3 automatic payments I'd set up during the first year after Bernard died, when Wesley had mentioned they were having a difficult few months. A streaming service bundle, an addition to their phone plan, Tobias's hockey registration, small amounts individually, together, still running month after month. Never mentioned, never acknowledged. as invisible as everything else I'd provided. I made a note. I would come back to it. The morning I flew out of Pearson, I arrived at the gate early and sat with a coffee and watched people move past. Nobody was expecting anything from me. My phone was quiet. I had nowhere to be except where I was going. Victoria in late April is a different world from Ontario. The air smells like the ocean and something in bloom. The streets near the inner harbor have an unhurried quality. Older buildings, window boxes going green, people walking without the particular tension of a city that considers slowing down a form of failure. My hotel window looked out over the water. I stood at it for a long time after I'd unpacked. The gardens, when I got there the next morning, were exactly as Bernard had described them from a postcard his parents had sent decades ago. Blossoms in colors I didn't have names for. Paths that curved in ways that kept surprising you. I walked slowly and didn't check the time once. I was sitting on a bench near the Japanese garden, writing in a small notebook I'd bought at the airport, when a woman settled at the other end of the bench. She appeared to be around 70, with white hair pulled back and the look of someone comfortable in her own company. She glanced at my notebook. "Are you writing or drawing?" "Writing," I said. "I'm not sure what exactly." She smiled. That's usually the honest kind. Her name was Anne-Marie Pelletier. She was from Fredericton, newly retired, traveling alone for the first time in 50 years. We ended up walking together for 2 hours, circling the gardens twice, talking in the easy way that sometimes happens between strangers who have no shared history and therefore nothing to perform. She asked me why I'd come to Victoria alone. I told her almost everything. The home base app, the 38 tasks, the overheard phone call, the tackle box and the card. Anne-Marie listened without interrupting, and when I finished she was quiet for a moment. "I spent years looking after everyone who came through my door," she said finally. Then I just kept going, because that was what I knew how to be. It took me until 68 to figure out that caring for people and disappearing into other people's lives are two completely different things. I wrote that down in my notebook. She noticed and laughed. On the third day in Victoria, my phone started. Wesley first. "Mom, where are you?" "I thought you were picking up Tobias Thursday." Then, "Mom, please call me." Then a voicemail I didn't listen to right away. Then Brenda, "Joe, this is really not okay. We have plans this weekend. We need you here." I sat on the hotel bed and read through all of it. What struck me, really struck me, was that not one message asked how I was. Not one asked whether I was safe or somewhere I'd wanted to be. Every message was about logistics, about the disruption my absence had caused to their calendar. I texted Wesley, "I'm in Victoria, BC. I'm fine. I'll call when I'm ready." He called within the minute. I answered. "Mom," exhausted and slightly sharpened, his version of frightened. "You didn't tell anyone you were leaving." "I know. Tobias had hockey Thursday and nobody was there for pickup." I looked out the window at the harbor. A ferry was crossing toward the mainland, slow and steady on flat water. "Tobias has 2 parents," I said. "I hope one of them managed." A long pause. "That's not fair, Mom." I'm not sure fairness is quite the right word for this conversation. He didn't know what to say to that. Neither did I, for a moment. I told him I'd call in a few days, and I ended the call. My hands were shaking slightly afterward. Not because I regretted it, because I had never done that before in my life. The next morning, I woke to a screenshot forwarded by Linda Marchetti. Brenda had posted on Facebook a photograph of Tobias and Grace sitting at the kitchen table, both of them looking tired in the way children look when they've been up too late. The caption read, "It's hard when the people you count on choose themselves without warning. Our kids ask for their grandma every day. Family is supposed to show up." I stared at that post for a long time. I thought, she's written the story before I could say a word. Then the comments started shifting. A woman from my old book club wrote, "Didn't I see Joe picking those kids up nearly every single day for 2 years? She's earned a trip." Then another, "When was the last time you asked her if she needed anything?" Then a woman named Deborah Haynes from Winnipeg, a complete stranger. Retired women have lives too. The fact that this is even controversial says more about the expectation than the vacation. Nearly 400 people liked that one. I put my phone away and walked along the waterfront. I wasn't vindicated by the comments. What I felt was something sadder than either comfort or victory. A clear, quiet understanding of how common this was. How many women must be sitting somewhere reading that post and recognizing themselves in it without my ever knowing it? Wesley called again that evening. He sounded different this time. Something in his voice had changed. "I saw the comments," he said. I waited. Some of them said things I wasn't expecting. "What things?" A pause. "That may be that I hadn't been paying attention." He stopped, started again. "Mom, did we really ask that much of you?" I thought about the 38 blue tasks. I thought about the watercolor class I'd never finished. I thought about the 3 automatic payments still running quietly in the background of my account. "Do you remember the streaming subscription I set up for you the year after your father died?" I said. A pause. "What do you mean?" "And the addition to your phone plan. And Tobias's hockey registration 2 years ago." A longer silence. "Mom, are those still going?" "Yes." I could hear him absorbing that. Then, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's part of what I'm trying to tell you." The conversation lasted nearly an hour. By the end of it, Wesley wasn't defending the Facebook post. He wasn't defending much of anything. He was asking questions that started with the word you rather than the word we. Whether I was lonely, whether retirement had been what I'd imagined, whether I had things that were mine. I told him about Anna Mary Pelletier and the gardens. He went quiet. "I think I need to come out there," he said. "Wesley." "Not to argue, just to talk. I think I need to see you." He flew out 2 days later. We met at a cafe near the harbor. He looked like he hadn't slept properly. Which meant something had genuinely shifted in him. I ordered us both coffee and waited. "I canceled the home-based tasks," he said. "All the ones assigned to you." I nodded. "And I asked Brenda to take down the post." He looked at the table. "She did." "Okay?" She's working through some things." He stopped. "She's not ready to come out here." I didn't press. Wesley was sitting across from me, looking like a man who had spent 48 hours reconsidering things he'd taken completely for granted, and I knew that feeling well enough not to rush it. "Mom," he said, "when did this start? When did we start treating you like?" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Gradually," I said. "It always happens gradually. That's what makes it hard to see." He nodded, looked out at the water. "Dad would have said something if he'd been around." That surprised me. I sat with it. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe he counted on me to say it myself, eventually." We talked for nearly 3 hours. Not about schedules or logistics, but about Bernard and what the first year without him had actually been like. About the ways grief makes you reach for any sense of purpose you can find. About how I had convinced myself for a long time that being needed was the same thing as being loved. And how long it had taken me to understand the difference. At one point, Wesley said, "I failed you, Mom. I let it go on and I didn't ask." It was a simple sentence. It didn't fix everything, but it was his, and it was true, and that mattered more than I'd expected. Before he flew home, we agreed on things. Not a formal negotiation, more like a re-understanding of what the relationship could look like. I would see Tobias and Grace on my terms, not according to a scheduling app. I would let Wesley know when I needed something, and he would actually ask whether I was available before assuming I was. I would cancel the automatic payments. And we would have an honest conversations about what support looked like going forward and what it didn't. It wasn't a perfect resolution. Brenda and I would need more time, and more honesty, before anything between us felt entirely natural again. I wasn't sure it ever would. But I had stopped needing it to in order to feel okay. On my last evening in Victoria, I went back to the Butchart Gardens alone. The light was going golden, and the roses were starting to open. I walked slowly and thought about Bernard's card, which I had tucked into the outer pocket of my duffel bag and carried with me across the country. "I'll be there in the salt air, Joe." I stood still for a moment and breathed in. Flowers and ocean and the sound of a fountain somewhere behind a hedge. I hadn't come here to find closure, or to prove a point, or even to heal in any tidy sense of the word. I had come because a man who knew me better than I knew myself had told me to come, and he had been right. about the waiting, about the timing, about all of it. When I got home to Guelph 2 days later, I walked through the front door, and the house felt different. Not because anything in it had changed, but because I had. I unpacked my bag, took Bernard's card out of the outer pocket, and put it back in the tackle box, then set the tackle box on the dresser where I could see it rather than up on the closet shelf. That afternoon, I canceled the 3 automatic payments and messaged Wesley so he knew. He replied with a simple thank you, and then a few minutes later, "Can I bring the kids over Sunday? Just to visit?" I thought about it, genuinely thought about it, which was new. "Yes," I wrote, "I'd like that." Tobias arrived with a library book about deep-sea creatures that he wanted to read aloud to me. Grace came through the door and immediately asked if we could bake something, and climbed onto her step-stool at the counter with the focus of someone diffusing something complicated. I measured nothing, corrected nothing, and let her tip the flour in at her own pace. I was a grandmother, not a function in a scheduling app. Those are different things, and the difference matters enormously. That Sunday evening, I signed up for a 6-week watercolor course at the community center near my house. Thursdays, mine. The registration confirmation arrived in my inbox just before I went to bed. I sat there, looking at it for a moment, and thought about Bernard, about tackle boxes and salt air and all the things we mean to do and keep not doing. Then I thought about Anna-Marie Pelletier walking through the gardens, saying that's usually the honest kind, about writing that doesn't yet know what it is. I was 63 years old, and there were chapters ahead of me that belonged to no one but me. For the first time since the November Bernard died, that felt not like an ending, but like something I had simply forgotten I was allowed to begin.